We've talked about Jesus' journey through the land, and John kind of has a particular focus on what Jesus is doing. Like a lot of the stories just revolve all around what Jesus is up to. And we've had Jesus, a bunch of miracles, right? Began with the water to wine miracle. We've had some healings, we've had some feedings. He's been very contentious, so his message has been what we call polarizing. People love his message or hate his message. It's happened on both accounts. And last week, we had this tie-in with the Psalm 23, if you remember that. He makes me lie down in green pastures, he leads me beside still waters. We had that tie-in of Jesus is the shepherd and the provider, and the peace and the stillness. And that God provides for us, God directs us, and God protects us. Now, we stopped right before the end of that chapter. But at the end of that chapter, we had again, people were out to kill Jesus. And I don't know if that's like, I don't know if any of you guys have ever had anybody that's out to hurt you. I don't know, I can't recall. I've had people threaten to kill me, but I don't know if I've ever like really worried that somebody was really out to kill me. But Jesus got this pressure all the time. Like he'll give a message, it'll be a great message. Some people will come to know him, they'll believe in him, and then another group are like, okay, it's time to kill him. And so he's come through this, and Jesus has taken off with his friends, and he's gone back, and it says he went back to where his cousin John, if you know John the Baptist was his cousin John had been baptizing people. So probably back to where Jesus was baptized himself. And so it's kind of a safe place to him. It's like back into his home, right? He's retreated back into his home area. And I don't know if you feel that at all. I feel that often in different neighborhoods that I go to, that I feel comfortable where I am. Not necessarily whether it's more dangerous or less dangerous, it just feels comfortable. We used to do a lot of bike riding in Philadelphia. We lived in what was considered the most dangerous community, so people didn't want to go there. We'd bike ride through all other communities, but actually when we got back to our own community, we all felt safer. Like we had this big sigh of relief. And we had this rule, like if you know, like we call it a no-drop rule in cycling, so if somebody falls back, you stop for them. But we had neighborhoods where we had, if you got a flat tire, you better keep riding, like no one's stopping for you, right? We're going right through that neighborhood, so you don't want to get left behind there. But this is Jesus gone back to his safe place, right? It's back to his place of peace. And Jesus hears this part comes to him, that his friend Lazarus is sick. Now Lazarus, we read this in other Gospels, and we see this later on, that there was a family of at least three, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So two sisters and a brother. And Jesus hung out with them at numerous times, and he seemed to really enjoy hanging out with them. Like, you see Jesus in certain settings, and he's delivering a particular message, but usually when you see him with these three, he's relaxing. It's like going around to Doug's place. You just go around, you kick off your shoes, and you feel you can sit back and relax, right? It's a calm, peaceful place. That's what it was like for Jesus around these three people. And I think sometimes we miss this when we read about Jesus, was his human side. And John often refers to this kind of human side, so fully God and fully man. If you can comprehend that and come up with a good way of comprehending that, let the rest of the world know. Because I've never heard a good example of how you can do two completely different things at the same time. Sometimes we say, it's like I'm a dad and I'm a husband, but I'm the same person. But somehow Jesus was two completely different things blended into one. And so he was a friend to people, and he had friends, and he liked to hang out with his friends, and he liked to sit back and relax. I'm sure that if he was now, he'd definitely be a Parramatta fan, so he'd like to sit back and watch the Parramatta games when they're on. He wouldn't be a Sydney FC fan, because I think he'd always choose a winning team. He was relaxed when he was around. So these were really good friends of his. So he had his disciples that he was training, he was close friends with. These were really good friends with him. And so Jesus gets this message that his friend Lazarus is sick. Now understand at this point, Jesus has healed people. People that were otherwise sick, people had long-term illnesses, people who were disabled. Jesus had come and healed them. And so he gets this message, and I want to read this passage because I think it catches me every time. This is verses 5 and 6. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. When he heard that one of his closest friends the friend of the family was ill, that he knew that he could help them, and everybody else knew, his first reaction was to stay 2 days longer where he was. And I don't know how you feel about that. You call up your friend and you say, look, my mum, my brother, my sister, my child is really ill. I'm not sure if they're going to make it. And they say, well, okay, I'm going to take a couple extra days holidays and then I'll come and see you. It's the exact opposite of what I would expect somebody to do. Your close friends are in crisis. The two women who've been around you this time that you love and you express that you love and you care for, their brother looks like he's going to die and you say, yep, okay, let's wait a few more days. What's the deal with that? What's the deal with what Jesus is doing here? Why would he wait like this? And I was thinking about this, like, what is that like? And I thought, well, this is part of the story where we just have no idea what God sees compared to what we see. We see things from such a different perspective than what God sees them from. I was trying to think of a story with this, and I remember one day I was driving back from a church. I'd been speaking at a church, and we're driving on a highway, kind of like the M7, and there was a huge storm coming in, right? So this big storm coming in, the water's coming up, literally the water's rising, and you see the barriers that sit on highways, often between dividing highways. It's getting higher and higher, and I was with my friend Chris, and I was like, this water's getting pretty deep. Now we're driving a four-wheel drive, and I think we're going to make it, and suddenly the car in front of us stops. And I'm thinking, you better keep going here, right? Because we're going to get stuck here in this water, and the water's coming up. And I was like, he's got to go, we're going to go. And he waited, finally he went. And so he's going down through here, and I'm about to go, and I noticed that his car's moving. And it's moving, I realized his car is floating. I was like, I don't think cars are supposed to float in here. And the water's getting higher and higher, so we start to back up. But we've got probably 500 to 1,000 cars behind us, right? It's on the main highway. It's now jam-packed for kilometre after kilometre. And so the water comes up, and so we're the last car here. Now this other car is now underwater. The water's now high enough, it's over the top of the car, and it's coming down the barrier. Well, no one behind us knows what's going on, right? So we're on top of our car trying to get people to back up, and no one's backing up. And we realise that there's a family stuck down there, and so we come in a bit further, and my friend Chris goes and helps this family out and rescues the family out of the flood and brings it back to our car. And I thought, like, for us, right, it's this action-packed thing. My friend is rescuing a family from a flood. We're helping people out, but people a kilometre behind, I'm sure, are just angry and mad, and why have we got a traffic backup? What's going on? Why doesn't people just get out of the way? They have no idea this flood is in, because back up there, the water's all run off the highway. It just happened to be the drains were all blocked and it came up. And so we've got such a different perspective where we are. We can actually see what's happening, we see everything that's going on. People behind us have no idea. And you might be in that, right? You're in some kind of a traffic jam and you're frustrated, you're angry at what's going on without realising that somebody's in crisis down there. Or maybe you're a parent and you're seeing what's going on and your kids don't really get this perspective, right? Your kids often might say, why do we have to do that? Like, why am I doing these things? And you're thinking, I can see ahead. I can see what's going to happen in the future. I often try and catch myself now when I go to tell my kids, like, what I think they should do, because it's like, man, I never thought my parents knew anything much, right? And now I'm like, okay, it's all the same stuff that I know now that they knew then, but you don't know when you're younger. There's this idea of perspective. And so God's perspective, right, is timeless. He sees things differently than we see them unfolding. And so he's seen the end of the story, but we're only seeing this little angle. And so here's Jesus, and he's decided to wait a few days before he goes and helps his friends. So two days pass, and he says to his mates, all right, it's time to go. Now, I think at this point, his friends are probably a little confused. They're like, okay, your friend was dying and you decided not to go. Now you want to go. And they're like, hey, Jesus, by the way, do you remember what happened last time we were down in that part of the world? Like, they were trying to kill you. And I'm sure someone like, and Jesus, if they get you, like, we're going to be collateral damage, right? Like, we're going down with you as well. So they're obviously quite worried about this. And Jesus says to them, hey, look, my friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, and we've got to go down there. And they're like, oh, well, if he's fallen asleep, he's going to wake up at some point, right? I'm sure it was a bit of an amusing conversation with Jesus. He's like, yeah, he's fallen asleep. And Jesus like, just give him a few more days. He'll wake up. He can come up and see us. He's like, okay, guys, let me clarify. He's dead. And I've even seen The Princess Bride. There's a character in some point that dies in The Princess Bride. And they say, well, actually, he's not completely dead, like he's mostly dead. He's not all the way dead. Or if you're a Monty Python fan, I thought I'd show you, it's a little edgy, the dead parrot skit. It's like the parrot's dead. Like he tries for about 5 minutes to convince the pet store owner that the parrot is actually dead. This is Jesus, like, guys, no, I'm sorry, I said sleep. I thought you understood what that meant. He's dead. So like, all right, he's dead. Now we've got to go down there. What's the point of going down there? He's dead anyway. Nothing's going to happen. And then we see Thomas step in. And I often think, right, we pick up different stories of different people. We often give Peter a hard time. We give Martha a hard time. I'll get into a bit of her in a minute. But Thomas here, I want to say that we call him Doubting Thomas because of something that happens after the resurrection. But I say we call him Thomas the Brave. Thomas is the first one who steps us up and says, look, hey, if he's going to go, then we've got to go with him. If that means we've got to die, we've got to die. Right? There's a real bravery in Thomas. It's like, hey, we're going to go in here as well. We're going down with Jesus. We're all in at this point. There's a bravery about what Thomas says, and he says, okay, we're all going to go. So they all start going there, and on the way down there, they meet Martha. And again, Martha gets a bit of a bad rap at times, because there's a story of her and her sister, and says Martha works hard, and she's doing all this stuff, and her sister seems like she's lounging around doing nothing all day. And so we talk about which one's better all the time. But Martha was that person. Martha is a great person to have in your church. Martha's the one who's always kicking in and getting things done. I don't think Martha was a showy person. I don't think she wanted to be up front. But Martha was getting in there and getting stuff done. So she's the first one to come. Jesus, hey, look, it's over, right? It's finished. But why didn't you come? And if you can imagine that heartache that she has, that confusion she has, Jesus, you're our friend. You had a chance. We think you could have healed him, but you didn't show up. Can you help me understand why? And Jesus says to her a few little lines about Martha. Do you understand who I really am? Do you understand what's really going on? And you see Martha's reflection here, this deep faith. And this is what Jesus responds to her. I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Now, it seems a little confusing if you read that, but you keep going over and over and again, and you think, okay, Martha, her brother has just died. And Jesus is saying, actually, he's going to live. And at first, Martha's saying, okay, I believe in the resurrection. I believe that we're going to be raised from the dead. Her faith in Jesus is astounding. Her faith is astounding. And I think about that. Here's a guy that I think would have just let you down. He had the chance to come, to heal your brother, to make everything good. He didn't come, and still she believes. That's astounding. Like, her faith is so deep. And he unpacks it a little bit more. He goes, whoever is living now and believes, they're never going to die. Now that part will get a little bit confusing, I think, because we think about life and death in our human form. And Jesus is talking about what comes afterwards, this eternal life. And Martha's with him and she's believing. And so she heads back. Now Mary hears that Jesus is on the way. Now Mary's a little bit of a different person. Mary is the one, she's the one in your church that you know that she's just sitting talking with people. She's always finding a chance to talk with people. I think about this week, we've got our mobile food pantry, and we've got two kinds of teams there. We've got the ones who come and pack the food. They're the Marthas. And if they weren't packing the food, no one gets to eat, right? That's the basic line. No one gets to eat. But then we've got our Mary team, and they're the ones who are talking to people. Because there's something deeper going on with people. Besides needing to eat, they need to talk to somebody. They need to hear the good news. They need to have things unpacked. And so our team has the Marys and the Marthas. And they're both vital. If you only have one or the other, it just doesn't work. You've got to have both of them. And that's why these two sisters are beautiful when they're together. But you've got to think, Mary seems a little bit more clued in, a bit more emotional. And I think her expression to Jesus is like, why'd you let us down? We trusted you. You're our good friend. There's no one else that we've ever met that could have fixed this situation. And you let us down. And she's expressing that heartache and that pain. And I think a lot of times we think that we can't express that pain to God. We think that somehow it's wrong to tell God how we really feel. That somehow it's breaking the rules, or it's being a sinner, or it's being wrong to tell God how we really feel. Yet the Old Testament is full of times of people telling God exactly how they feel. Read the Psalms of David as he cries out in his anguish. We wouldn't quote David as being a way of praising God all the time. In fact, he calls God out for the things that he thinks God does wrong, because he's hurting and he's in pain. The entire book of Lamentations, if you're feeling kind of like on a real high and you want to get yourself down a little bit and get depressed, read the book of Lamentations. Lamentations doesn't have a happy ending. Sometimes we read what David will write and say, woe, 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 but in the end it's going to be all good. Or from the Habakkuk passage, right? Woe, 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 but in the end it's going to be all good. But part of Lamentations is like woe, 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 and even more woe. Because it's written at a time when people were hurting and in pain. They were struggling. And so what God is saying in that part of the scriptures is, it's okay to tell me exactly how you think and feel. I say a lot, God is a really big God. Like, he can handle, you can give God your absolute worst of how you feel about him. He can take it. He's not going to fall apart. He's not going to walk off and say, oh man, look, I'm just such a lousy God now. Look, I let my friends down. Look, this is horrible, right? He can take it. Because he's created us an image, which means we've got this emotion to express. And I think that's what we see in Mary, is she's expressing this emotion. Like, you've let me down. I'm hurting and you've let me down. And then it goes on to say Jesus felt their pain. And there's a word there, and I don't get too much into the Greek of the how this is, but there's a word in there that says, basically Jesus sighed, and the sigh of expression is letting out all that emotion. I don't know if you've ever been in a place and you just got so much emotion and you just you just let out all your pain. And that's what Jesus does, which means that he was fully feeling their pain. Because this was his friend as well. So even though Jesus had this perspective, he knew what was going to come, he actually knew what he was going to do, he was still bearing all the pain of his friends. And again, I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of position where you know the outcome, you know things are going to be okay, but you're still eating that emotion. Right? Have you ever cried in a film? Right? A film, it's made up. Right? It's made up. It's not real. It's not like you're watching a documentary or the news. It's made up. And it still can bring you to tears. Or if you ever watch a film multiple times and there's a sad part and you know the happy endings to come, but you're still sad. You're still sad over here. Even though you know it's going to be happy. And this is the emotion Jesus is coming on, which is part of his humanity. We're about to see his divinity, but this is his humanity coming to bear. And he lets out this humanity, and he has this deep side. And it's often quoted, the shortest verse in the Bible is in here. It says Jesus wept. And it's not a wailing, it's not this big funeral kind of weeping. It's just that the tears begin to come down his eyes because his friends are hurting. He's hurting. The whole situation's hurting. Jesus felt their pain. Now Lazarus at this point, I think it'd be fascinating to talk to Lazarus what he's feeling right now, right? Because he's dead. I don't know where he is. This is where it gets a little tricky on, what happens. Do we go straight to heaven? Do we wait around a little bit? Did Lazarus go to heaven and got a call and had to come back again? I don't think so. But Lazarus maybe is in this in between. Maybe he doesn't have any memory of what's going on. But Jesus says, hey, let's go get Lazarus out of the tomb. Because I'm going to take care of him. He uses this kind of terminology again. He's falling asleep, but I'm waking him up. He's dead, but I'm going to bring him back. Now, I don't know if you've ever been and smelled a dead animal. When you're driving past in a car and there's a kangaroo that's been dead for a little while beside the road, or you're on a farm and you come across a dead sheep, right? They stink. When you're out walking or on a bike, the stench comes for a lot longer. You smell it for a ways, and then you keep smelling it for a long time. This is Lazarus, right? He hasn't been in some kind of cooler waiting for his autopsy or waiting for the burial. He's not in a funeral home. He's been locked in a cave, which would most likely be pretty hot, and he started to rot. That would be what happens within 4 days. Again, if you've seen a film or you've seen a documentary or maybe you've seen live things where people start to decompose, it doesn't take very long. And so Lazarus, according to all accounts, would have been decomposing at this time. And people are like, hey, Jesus, we could roll this stone away and then get him out, but he's going to stink. People are still thinking that same way. Jesus says, no, go and take him out. And out comes Lazarus. Now he's wrapped up, kind of like a mummy, right? He's got all his stuff off around. I mean, this would just be mind-blowing to see. You've buried your brother, you've buried your child, you've buried your husband, your wife, your closest friend, and suddenly they get up out of the grave and they come back up again. And this, for me, to this point, is Jesus' greatest miracle. So it's great that he turned water into wine and kept the party going. It was really nice that he fed 5,000 people, 10,000, 15, 20, however many happened to be there. It was great that he healed people with like deformities, leprosy, but he's raised somebody from the dead. And this is Jesus' statement that he has power over death. He has power over death. And this is what we're going to see right as we keep going through to the ultimate resurrection. But Jesus' point has power over death, the greatest of the miracles. And out comes Lazarus and he's healed. Now again, I don't know if Lazarus was happy at this point or not happy. It'd be very confusing if you're Lazarus to know what's going on. Jesus knew that he could heal him, knew that he would heal him, knew that he'd bring him back for the death, yet still he went through this process. And even going through that process, he mourned with his friends. And so what do we get out of that, I think? I think for me, one of the most important things is to know that God is with us through the worst of our pain, in the same way Jesus was there with his friends through the worst of their pain. It's got to be one of the most common questions you're asked in ministry, you're asked as a pastor. Where is God when things go bad? I like to say he is right there in the middle of things. If you read Genesis, there's one of the interpretations in Genesis, and it's maybe the one I like, is it says there was darkness around the earth and God descended into the chaos. That darkness, the chaos that existed before, God went into there and created out of there. That when you find the darkness, the most horrible things, God is in the midst of that. He's in the midst of that. But he's not always fixing and healing and changing, but he's in the midst of that. If you read the book of Job, one of the most troubling stories and one of the most beautiful endings, right in the middle there is Job is at the worst point in his life and his friends are with him. And it says for the first week they just sit in silence with him. They're just present with him. They don't have any words to say. And in fact, when they start talking, they say all the wrong things. And I think as Christians, one of the hardest things we have to do is just to be quiet sometimes. To not give any amazing answers, but just to be present with somebody, to sit with them, to be around them, to know that they're not alone. Can be one of the most powerful things. And I think that's what we have here with Jesus saying, I am there in the midst of as bad as it's going to get for you, I'm going to be right there with you. Then we also have the idea that he brings new life. Now, there's not a lot of people in the Bible that are raised from the dead, and I think before that and after that, there weren't many people raised from the dead either. So we're not going to see a lot of people coming back. So if your hope is that God is going to bring back one of your loved ones when they die, I'm going to say it's a pretty slim chance. But there is this bigger picture of life to come. And that's what Jesus is foreshadowing here. There's life to come. Those who are alive will never die. They'll live on in eternity. And we have that opportunity. So we have this beautiful hope to live in, but in the midst of the darkness and the worst things, we have a Savior who's sitting right there beside us, who's not leaving us at any point. He's never leaving us. He loves us that much. And so people say, where is God in the midst of this? I said, God is right there in the middle of it, and he's hurting. He's hurting just like we are. The same way that Jesus was hurting for his friends. God is there hurting with us. But he brings new life. Generally, that new life is a spiritual new life. Not the physical, but the spiritual new life. Let me pray. God, I thank you that you've entered into the midst of our mess and our heartache and our pain, whether we've caused it ourselves or it's been caused by others or caused us by the fall of the world. And Lord, I thank you that you give us new life. Lord, I thank you that you say that we'll never die. And that when we live in you, we'll never die. Lord, I thank you for that. I thank you for the love that you showed for your friends in this passage, for Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Lord, and imagine the amazing party they had where the week turned into just the greatest celebration, Lord. I thank you for that. But I thank you also that you cry with us when we're in pain. Pray your blessings on the time and rest of today. Lord, help us to never forget that you're there with us. Amen.